Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the January edition of the IMPLAN webinar series. My name is Candy Klaus. I'm going to give people just a couple minutes to trickle in here, and we'll get started officially at 3:02. Good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. I see some familiar names out there, so welcome back to those that have been to one of these before, and welcome to the first time for those that are joining us. Today, we are going to be talking about lobbying with IMPLAN and look at how one nonprofit influenced legislation with economic impact analysis. My very special guest today is Carl Marrara with the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Before we dive into all of this, just to let you know, if you are not familiar with this platform, if you have a question, you can post them in the questions box. I do have Michael Neely standing by to answer some of those questions, and if we can, we'll answer some live at the end as well. You can also raise your hand by clicking on that little hand icon located on the pop-up screen as well. This is what it looks like, and then if we call on you, you will click on that microphone to unmute yourself and ask your question live. All right, so what are we going to learn today? Why IMPLAN Cloud is being used to influence legislation for lobbying, and how using IMPLAN Cloud helped a nonprofit illustrate the history of manufacturing at the state level and advocate for their pro-growth policies and landing a huge investment. So let's get started and get an introduction to the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. As I mentioned, my guest today is Carl Marrara. He oversees the government affairs, external communications, and political strategy of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. He acts as a writer, producer, and reporter for them in their PMA Perspective, a weekly half-hour news program on Pennsylvania business, government, and politics, and as an editor of the PMA Bulletin, a premier in-depth analysis of current issues facing Pennsylvania businesses. As the chief lobbyist for the association, he focuses on legislative advocacy, bill tracking, and grassroots activation. To better advocate pro-growth policies, he focuses on building coalitions with allied stakeholders such as regional manufacturing associations, trade groups, and national think tanks. With a tenure of more than a decade at PMA, Carl graduated with his BA in Political Science from Elizabethtown College in 2009 and a Master of Arts in Public Policy from New England College in 2012, where he now serves as a part-time lecturer. So Carl, thank you so much for joining us. It is absolutely our pleasure.
No, thank you very much for the invitation.
Wonderful. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your personal and professional background and how you landed at the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association?
Sure. So like you said, I graduated in 2009 from Elizabethtown College, and that political science degree I always thought was what you did to get ready to go to law school. And graduating in 2009 was not so rosy of a job outlook. And I was interning with a different business association in Harrisburg at the time of graduation, and they presented me with a job offer, and I always thought, you know, I could defer that law school admission for a year and try this out. And I'm probably one of the better decisions that I made professionally, realizing that, you know, maybe it's not the nitty-gritty detail of I always wanted to go into legislative law, and what I learned in that year is that you know, the detail of the writing of the actual legislation was not where my passion was, but in the selling of the ideas. And you know, IMPLAN is one of those tools that we have acquired here at the Manufacturers Association, and I started here, I believe it was in 2012. But we, you know, using IMPLAN is one of those tools that helps us sell those ideas, and has been very, very successful for us.
That's fantastic. And what are all of your responsibilities? You wear a lot of hats with the organization.
Yeah, so we're a really small organization. You know, we're a very different type of business association than what most people would probably think that you know, a lot of people are used to their chambers of commerce in their respective states, or even locally. But we're a little bit different. So our entire mission at PMA is advocacy. So you know, we don't do the kind of typical business organization, you know, the meet and greets, business card exchanges, you know, offer different incentives to vendors of industrial services for getting in front of our membership. We don't publish our membership list. You know, we're very different in that aspect. Our sites are set on the Green Dome across the street from us. We're located right on State Street in Harrisburg, directly across from the Capitol, and that's where our sites are set. You know, and one of the things that's really beneficial with the way that our membership works is that because we don't do those types of events that sell, you know, massive sponsorships, we're not beholden to, you know, any one particular member, or even a sector of the manufacturing industry. That we can advocate what we feel is best for the manufacturing industry in Pennsylvania as a whole. But yeah, we wear a lot of hats in that. I mean, all of us do. Again, there's really only 4 of us full time, and one of our main missions is just content generation, and you know, raising awareness about issues that manufacturers face in the public policy arena, bringing those issues to life through TV, through social media, through audio, and telling those stories. And our main audience is, you know, the general public, but most importantly, lawmakers, so that they can actually take that information and put an idea into legislation that hopefully will benefit the entire sector.
That's fantastic. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association?
Sure. So we're more than a century old. We were founded back in 1909, and the founder was Joseph Grundy of southeastern Pennsylvania. He actually went on to become a United States senator, but he ran a very, very large, very successful textile manufacturing facility down in the southeast, just north of Philadelphia. And that was who founded the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. So probably through most of the history, I think it was in the 60s, whenever we got into workers' compensation law, that there was an insurance company that PMA founded, and was by far the largest insurance company that represented many manufacturers, many major industries throughout Pennsylvania. We no longer are affiliated with that insurance company. Back in 2000, the association and then PMA Group Insurance actually split. But we carry on the legacy and the original intent of the organization, and that is to advocate for pro-growth, you know, pro-manufacturing policies at the state level. And like I said, we work with a lot of, or as you said in the introduction, kind of upstream and downstream. We work with a lot of other organizations. So there are about 5 regional manufacturing organizations located throughout the Commonwealth. And they're the ones that do a lot of the more traditional functions of an association like ours. They're the ones that actually do the meetings and meet and greets and exchanges and offer vendors of industrial services that interface with their membership. We work really closely with them. They don't own us, we don't own them, but they rely on what we do here at the Capitol, and we rely on what they do for grassroots outreach. And then upstream, we do work with a number of national organizations. So we're the state deployment partner for BIPAC, which is the Business Industry Political Action Committee. They actually house our advocacy technology platforms. We are the state partner for the National Association of Manufacturers. And once again, we don't own them, they don't own us. We do function independently, but there's great synergy there. And then we also work with our other statewide associations. We've kind of become the association that other associations in Pennsylvania really love to ally and partner with. So, we have great relationship with our Pennsylvania State Chamber. The National Federation of Independent Business is actually housed within our offices. We work with a number of major energy industry groups that are statewide throughout our Commonwealth. So we kind of pride ourselves on being the friend that you want to have. We find ourselves in a number of legislative battles, because of that. And, we depend on our allies and our friends to flag those issues for us and vice versa.
That's just fantastic. Is this kind of setup unique to Pennsylvania? Are there other states that have that kind of split between what your work is at the state level and all the regional organizations?
That's a good question. So it's a little bit split. So there are a number, within the National Association of Manufacturers, and this is relatively new, there was always an organization called COSMA, which is the Conference of State Manufacturing Associations, of which we are a part, and of my boss, our president CEO, was actually the chair of for a number of years. There are a number of manufacturing organizations, quote unquote manufacturing organizations, that are actually housed within the statewide chambers. It's about a 50-50 split, with the number of states having that kind of setup where the manufacturing advocacy arm is housed within the chamber. The other half have their own independent association. We're a little bit different. I did mention, the split of the insurance company, in that one of the reasons that we're able to do what we do is that we are an endowed organization. So that allows us, again, kind of the freedom, the flexibility to be able to advocate for an entire sector rather than independent businesses, what we would kind of refer to as corporate welfare. And be able to look holistically at the kind of the playing field in front of us, as far as not picking winners and losers, not advocating for particular businesses, but industries as a whole. And I do think that we are very unique in that regard.
That's wonderful. And, my roots coming from Ohio, you're working in Pennsylvania. We know manufacturing is such an important part of the economy. 2021, 18% of the output for Pennsylvania was based in manufacturing.
Yes.
How do you talk about how important this is to someone who might not realize the impact that these industries have on the state of Pennsylvania?
Yeah, well, I mean, manufacturing is as we always say it, manufacturing is the engine that drives our economy, because it's not just the workforce that's on the shop floor, but I mean, millions upon millions of additional jobs are sustained through distribution networks, vendors of industrial services, even, as far down as the resale markets. If it wasn't for that core manufacturing activity, there wouldn't be a product to sell. Pennsylvania is a legacy state. I mean, quite honestly, I mean, Pennsylvania's steel is what built the United States. I mean, almost every skyscraper in Manhattan, the bridges, all of that is steel that came from Pennsylvania. And we also do not a lot of people realize, a lot of glass manufacturing, and all those towers that are reaching up into the clouds. A lot of those have their foundational footprint here in Pennsylvania. So we have a ton of industry, but it's very, very diverse. I joke it's everything from, the chocolate bars that everybody's familiar with, and Hershey is one of our best members. Everything from chocolate bars, to Zippo lighters, to Chinook helicopters are actually all made in Pennsylvania. So we have a very, very, very diverse manufacturing industry here in the Commonwealth. And, you know, it really is kind of the driver of that economy. And manufacturing has become, I don't want to say a buzzword politically, but you'd be hard pressed to find a political campaign in the last maybe 4 to 6 years that doesn't kind of center around, you know, an economic policy where manufacturing is at the core of it. So, you know, we don't take that lightly. You know, obviously we've been preaching that since 1909, but it's kind of become a little bit more publicly aware as our economy is ever shifting, ever changing. And I think that the COVID-19 pandemic really highlighted a lot of that, because we realized how delicate our supply chains, our distribution systems are. And there was kind of that turn to refocus on, you know, what can we make here in the US? What can we make in the Commonwealth? And, you know, our allies at the National Association of Manufacturers, you know, we rely on them so heavily, but they're pretty agnostic as to where business locates so long as it's within the borders of the United States. We do care very deeply, so we're trying to set that policy differential amongst our competitor states, that we want that business investment to come here to our Commonwealth as opposed to one of our competitor states. And you know, we think that Pennsylvania has a lot to offer. And you know, it's our goal to, you know, make it the smart business decision to locate, hire, and expand facilities here in our Commonwealth rather than one of our competitor states.
Fantastic. Well, let's move into challenges before using IMPLAN.
Sure.
What kind of challenges were you facing in your work with the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association that led you to start exploring using economic impact analysis?
Yeah, I kind of joke with IMPLAN. It was, you know, we as association executives kind of get cold called all the time for various, you know, software services, advocacy services, communication tools. And I think IMPLAN might be, I'm really not saying this because I'm just on this webinar. It really might be like one of the only products that we bought on the spot from a cold call, because it was timing is everything, right? So one of the things that our president CEO, and he's been with PMA for, I think he's on his 26th year, but one of the things that he would always say was, you know, you can't miss what you never had. And at the time, and referring to, you know, economic opportunities. And at the time that we got the call from IMPLAN, you know, we were in the running to site a new location for Braskem USA. They're a Brazilian company. Their US headquarters are actually in Philadelphia. You know, they deal in the plastics and chemical space. And they were looking at siting a new location. And with Pennsylvania's discovery and with the ability to extract natural gas resources, they were looking at potentially siting a location for a new facility in Marcus Hook, which is Delaware County, just south of Philadelphia. And it would make total sense for them, right? Because I mean, their headquarters are there. You know, there's a strong workforce presence there. But they ultimately chose to expand their footprint in Texas, and they chose a location in LaPorte, Texas. And there were a number of news articles that went out at the time. You know, we knew we were in the final running for it. And there was an article that said that they took almost the exact design, the exact plans that they were looking at for Marcus Hook and planted that location in LaPorte, Texas. And, you know, when my boss said, you know, you can't miss what you never had, and we got the presentation from IMPLAN, I kind of thought, you know, maybe there is a way we could miss what we never had. And maybe this is a tool that we could use to show policymakers, because the reason that they chose LaPorte, Texas was because the regulatory environment in Pennsylvania was, and unfortunately still kind of is, so slow for energy, especially pipeline development, that Braskem realized that they just weren't going to be able to permit the pipelines to get the feedstocks that they needed into Marcus Hook in time for that facility. Like the facility would have been constructed and ready to function well before the regulatory agencies would have been able to approve all the pipeline infrastructure needed to actually make that facility work. So they chose Texas instead. And what we could do, and with the questions that I asked when we had the presentation from IMPLAN was, could I go in and, we were reading the articles about exactly how many construction jobs it was going to be, exactly how many full-time, chemical engineering jobs it was going to be into perpetuity. Could I plug those numbers in for Delaware County and go to lawmakers and say, here's what we missed out on? And I mean, of course, the answer is yes. And so many times policymakers, especially I think maybe at the state level, have this idea of, okay, well, we missed out on 300 construction jobs and 100 manufacturing jobs. Yeah, those are big numbers, but ultimately what does that mean in the grand scheme of the economy? And with IMPLAN, we can say, no, it's not just those direct jobs. It's these indirect jobs, and it's these induced jobs. And this is how whole economies are made and sustained. And I mean, going back to that core manufacturing activity sustains millions upon millions of additional jobs upstream and downstream. IMPLAN gives us the ability to actually see that. And that's really how we've used this tool, and what was so attractive about it, that we could actually miss what we never had and go to lawmakers and plead our case as to why things like regulatory reform to speed up those permitting processes are so important.
That's such a great story, but I have to say the next story is even better. Talking about how you were able to use IMPLAN Cloud to land something within Pennsylvania. And this all starts with Act 66.
Yes. Yes.
So can you
So
tell us a little bit about what this was?
sure. So, I say that we're not for corporate welfare, and truly we are not. We've been for 2 tax credits in the entire history of our organization. They just so happen that it just so happens that both of them are probably in the last 10 years. But the very first one was a tax credit that brought and I don't know if there's folks here from the Northeast, but that brought the Shell plant, the Royal Dutch Shell petrochemical plant. It's an ethane cracker to Monaca, which is in Beaver County, just north of Pittsburgh. Again, using those natural gas feedstocks to make the precursor for pretty much every plastic product that you could possibly think of. And they're doing it extremely cleanly. It is a state-of-the-art facility, best in the world. And at the time, it was Governor Tom Corbett passed and this is very important, a production-based tax credit. So not a single state dollar was spent until that facility was up, operational, and actually churning out product. And that facility out in Western Pennsylvania just came online several months ago. And looking at that project, I mean, that is just a transformative project for Pennsylvania. And it was going to be sited, no offense to you, I know your allegiance is to Ohio, but it was either going to be sited in Pennsylvania, Ohio, or West Virginia, most likely, just because of where the feedstock was. And we wanted to compete and win. Given our current regulatory and current tax structure at the time, there was no way that we could compete with Ohio and West Virginia, thus the tax credit was necessary. Some minds at work up at the Capitol here in Harrisburg had the idea to do the same thing. So that tax credit back in 2012, I believe it was, 2013, was passed on the value chain of ethane. So one of the things that folks at the Capitol were looking at was doing a similar type of tax credit on the value chain of methane. So all of these are derivatives of natural gas. The ethane is more of a byproduct actually of natural gas, whereas the methane is coming out in the northern part of Pennsylvania, especially the northeast part of Pennsylvania, extremely pure. The problem is that the value chain of methane is not nearly as valuable as the value chain of ethane. But nonetheless, it was a way for us to keep the energy industry here up afloat, and to use a very necessary product in order to, again, secure those supply chains and distribution networks. One of the main things that is used with methane is in the fields of fertilizers, and being that agriculture is so important to Pennsylvania, and all of that feedstock right now is kind of coming in from Saudi Arabia, from Russia, and we had the opportunity to actually do that here in Pennsylvania, where it would be cleaner, safer. We would reap the economic benefits and also secure our supply chains distribution networks for our agricultural community, which is so important. So they had the idea to pass a piece of legislation, or attempt to pass a piece of legislation that was very, very similar to the tax credit that brought Shell to Monaca Beaver County. So the brains at work huddled up with us, and we put together an economic impact study. At the time, we thought that there were two individuals who were looking to invest. Should we be able to pass a tax credit similar to what became Act 66? And they gave us the specs for what they anticipated the construction to be, what the full-time employment to be, and it made it really easy to plug it into those two counties and those two areas in Pennsylvania, and then churn out the results. And every single time that this bill was debated, and I won't take you through the whole history, but we'll just say that it passed in one legislative session, and then it got shut down. It passed in another legislative session, and then it got vetoed, and then it got written into a code bill that then became Act 66 the third time around. But every single time that this bill or these issues were debated on the floor of either our House or our Senate, our study that was used or that was completed using IMPLAN was by far the most cited study. Or the thing that was definitely the spine of the argument for those in favor of this, and that really was, I think, the difference maker in getting this passed, with a governor that hasn't always been as I don't want to say friendly. At the time, it was Governor Wolf. We now have Governor Shapiro administration, but the previous administration was not very, very kind to new energy products, energy projects. And the economics of this, especially for northeastern Pennsylvania, which is struggling mightily economically, was extremely attractive. What we didn't know is, and I don't want to get in front of you, basically, I think that where we're heading to next is what ultimately happened. The results ended up being even more grandiose than what we had ever even imagined. But we were able to pass Act 66, and that bill became law. And now there are opportunities for companies to come into Pennsylvania to use that feedstock. Again, production-based credit, no cent of state dollars will be given to any company until an end-use product is made and delivered to the citizens of Pennsylvania. And ultimately, it took a little while, as everything in Pennsylvania legislatively typically does, but we were able to be successful.
Such a great story. When you were putting together the report, were you specifically writing it for the legislature as an audience?
Yeah, yes, and also, for the press as well, because this is just an issue that it's difficult. Anytime you're dealing with projects like this, the numbers are so large, it's very, very difficult for people to truly understand what the magnitude of it is, which is why we were able to take that report and then use other tools in our communications mediums, whether we did several TV programs on this, podcasts, interviews with media, and social media work. But then, we just have a Canva account and, created infographics to kind of bring to life, what these numbers truly mean for that area of Pennsylvania and the Commonwealth as a whole. And, it's one thing to, run a report and, make like a little white paper about it. It's another to actually bring it to life. So yeah, our main audience were the lawmakers, especially the report itself, the staffers that are writing those floor speeches and working on the legislation. But we also, ultimately what we are as lobbyists or as executives of a trade association we're educators, and we had to educate the press on what this actually meant, upstream, downstream, why the natural gas industry was so vital for the location of these, but then ultimately what the end use products are used for, how that process works, and what the economics of it are.
Fantastic. So let's dive in to Luzerne County.
Yeah. So
tell us about
this
this Nacero project.
Yeah, so this is the exciting part. So we passed Act 66, and there are those same two companies that were eyeing Pennsylvania for investment are still eyeing Pennsylvania for investment. The one has changed significantly. It's actually going to enter into the hydrogen space, which is kind of new energy 2.0. But again, a lot of the methane and the things that were done in Act 66 will help position Pennsylvania for the hydrogen push that is coming at the national level. But the whole time that this was happening, there was this company in Texas called Nacero, who we had never even heard of. But they were sitting on the sidelines, sitting back, watching what was happening, and then made an announcement probably 2 or 3 months after Act 66 passed that they are going to invest $6 billion into a plant in Luzerne County. It's going to be 4,000 construction jobs over 6 years, hundreds, upwards of, probably 800, up to 800 full-time manufacturing jobs afterwards. And what they're going to do is they're going to take that methane. It almost sounds like science fiction. I still don't quite all understand it, but they're going to take that natural gas and turn it into motor vehicle fuel that is interchangeable with traditional gasoline. It's going to burn extremely cleaner than traditional gasoline. The refining process to do it will be incredibly environmentally friendly compared to traditional methods. It's truly groundbreaking, and this was not even at all a part of the equation when we were forecasting what these two small projects could be. And I'll put it, even folks sitting on this call might not even realize how big this is. So $6 billion investment. I'll take you back, what was it, 2018-19, when Amazon was trying to site its HQ2. That was a $4 billion investment, like $3.5 to $4 billion investment. And I jokingly referred to it as the Bezos Hunger Games. I mean, there were hundreds upon hundreds of, governments banding together to, create these wild, incentives for Amazon to locate HQ2 in their region, in their city. I mean, cities like Chicago were saying that they'd completely remake T-line infrastructure. I mean, it was crazy the amount of money that cities and governments were going to throw at Amazon to site their HQ2 there. Ultimately, they decided, as we all remember, to split it between New York and Crystal City, and then they scrapped New York. So Crystal City is looking at what, like a $2.5 billion investment? This is more than twice that. To make something that is, relied upon for our modern economy to tick and work. So this was, it was mind-blowing. And again, for the announcements and for the press events to announce this project, to again go back and hear some of the figures that we produced with our report, crediting the passage of Act 66 towards that work that we had done through our study through IMPLAN, is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's such an amazing story on a brownfield site too, as well, correct?
Yes. Yeah. We have a lot of that in Pennsylvania, especially up in the Northeast. But yeah, I mean, again, it's one of those situations. With Pennsylvania, we're a legacy state. We're a very old state. So a lot of manufacturers that come into Pennsylvania will choose brownfield locations because a lot of infrastructure already exists there, whether it be rail car access, water access, even just highways. But I mean, one of the reasons that Nacero was eyeing Northeast Pennsylvania is because it's so close to all of the major arteries, all the corridors, I-95, 81, 80, 83, all those kind of intersections up and down the eastern seaboard are all right there. And, to be able to make a product that is cleaner, more efficient, and extremely environmentally beneficial compared to what the status quo is, to supply all those vehicles up and down the eastern seaboard is really exciting.
Such a great story, and the scale is truly just
It's remarkable.
amazing.
It's
To be
and
kind of
we
dropped in
never
your lap
update.
after you put together the legislation.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny, we never updated our study to, bring Nacero into the equation. I mean, one, the legislation was already done, and two, I was a little bit afraid it might break your system.
Well, I don't think $6 billion is going to break the system, but it would be a fascinating thing to look at. So we did have a question come in. How would you handle it if, say, someone was coming in and looking at various competing places within your state? Maybe they wanted to look at somewhere on the northeast side and maybe somewhere outside of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, so that's where we become agnostic. So, the National Association of Manufacturers is agnostic whether it comes in the United States or when it comes in the United States, but goes to, various states. So long as it's in Pennsylvania, I don't think that we would necessarily care. But there are 5 regional manufacturing organizations that would care very deeply. So that would be more up to them. The nice thing about IMPLAN is the ability to, and I would do this for any one of them that requested, of those regional manufacturing associations, to be able to group we're 67 counties, and to be able to, group those counties together to, make the economic region by which we can do a study is really great. And, I could see, looking at the different regions, or putting a few different regions together to look at one proposal. But a lot of times in Pennsylvania, a lot of it comes down to feedstock. So most of the manufacturing growth that we've seen has been in that energy space. So it's a matter of what you need. So in the western south, especially the southwestern part of Pennsylvania, closer to Pittsburgh, a lot of the natural gas that's coming out in Pennsylvania in that region is what they refer to as wet. So it has a lot of those byproducts like the ethane in it. Whereas up in the Northeast and across the northern tier of Pennsylvania, it's very dry. And that's what's mainly used in the more traditional. It's so pure up there that they're able to run equipment directly off of what's coming out of the ground. That's very different than what's happening in southwestern Pennsylvania. So in the growth in those spaces, a lot of times you're going to locate where your feedstock is. So a lot of the products that we're talking about, especially in this space, are very low, very high production, very low yield. So the transportation costs in the feedstock especially is incredibly important when citing a business location or a manufacturing location. So the more that you can keep those transportation costs down for your feedstocks, the more advantageous it's going to be to locate in one place versus another.
That's so fantastic that you can kind of stay out of it while supporting either one of those places, as long as it wasn't, somewhere in Ohio or West Virginia, right?
Yeah, we won't talk about those Ohio.
We won't,
No.
we're not going to talk about that. I have some feelings about that football team named after one of your big exports too. So in terms of telling the story, what other projects or questions have you looked at using IMPLAN?
Yeah, so we do probably around 4 to 5 projects a year. And then, for us, the time-consuming part isn't necessarily the running of the project, it's the creating all the ancillary around it. So, I'm not a graphic designer. Our communications director is fantastic, but I mean, she herself is kind of a Swiss Army knife, and graphic design is one very small piece of that. But we work really collaboratively to run these scenarios, but then to bring them to life. And we do that through video, we do that through audio, we do that through social media, and we do that through the graphic work. So, creating all of those pieces kind of around our study is by far the most time-consuming part. So our most recent study that we did is a really cool project. So there's another company out of Texas called Encina, and they are going to be citing a manufacturing facility that actually takes plastic out of the waste stream. So, back, again, kind of stemming from COVID-19, China really stopped accepting a lot of what people thought they were recycling plastics were really just going into a cargo container, getting shipped over to China, and God knows what they did with it after that. So that practice kind of stopped, and it left America with a real problem. What do we do with this plastic waste? And this company, Encina, is actually they're leading the charge, and a lot of other companies are going to follow the lead. It's new technology to take that plastic, that plastic and that's post-use, and to reclaim it as its original kind of feedstock footprint. So to tear that back down to the molecular level and then be able to put that on rail cars, into trucks, and send it out to domestic manufacturers for products to be remade. And there was a potential for a site in Pennsylvania, and we were able to run the numbers on that to show that part of the Commonwealth, a very, very small part of the Commonwealth, what that plant would mean. It just so happens that there's actually a Merck plant in that same town, and the very day that they were announcing this project, that Merck plant announced it's going to close. And it's going to be 300 manufacturing jobs at this new Encina plant, and the number of jobs that were at the Merck plant were 300 jobs. And it's all in the chemical engineering space. And we were able to kind of go in and use our study to reassure that entire community, that entire region, that it was gonna be okay. That as the Merck plant shut down, that the economy would be okay, using those indirect and induced jobs that we were able to turn around in the IMPLAN report to show that this facility will act very, very much like that Merck facility. And that wasn't as public of a report, but we did use that, and Encina is using that to educate especially members of the press in that area about the upstream and downstream effects of a manufacturing facility like that, again, to reassure the area that the future was going to be okay for them.
Wow, that's almost a perfect, one-to-one replacement you don't hear about very often.
Yeah.
Another question from our audience today. This is a couple parts, so I'll ask them one at a time.
Sure.
What's the one thing you used from IMPLAN for your strongest argument to politicians?
Most of the time, it's just answering simple questions. I always kind of joke, like, we're a little bit like librarians. I don't always have the answers, but I know where to go to get them. And we so many times will get questions from particular lawmakers about how many manufacturers are there in this kind of manufacturing space versus this manufacturing space. And to be able to go into the IMPLAN data and not even run a scenario, but actually just look through in particular counties and regions, to say, okay, well, there's this many glass manufacturers, or there's this many, plastics packaging manufacturers. I can't necessarily give them the names of, they think that we have this like master list of every manufacturing firm in every single kind of industry throughout the Commonwealth, and we just don't. IMPLAN's probably one of the closest things we have to that. So to be able to go in to say, you have this many manufacturers in cabinet manufacturing, but then also to then go in and run a scenario like, I can then see all of the industries that are also in that region that are very closely tied to that. And to almost kind of take their question one step further, to show them the upstream and downstream impact of those, 25 to 250 jobs in their district or in their county region. I can say, you have this many in that specific industry, but upstream, there's, these are the top industries, and here's how many people are employed in those industries, and downstream, here's the top industries, and here's how many people are employed in those industries. So, I think one of the biggest impacts that we have using this tool is to be able to answer those questions and then take it a little bit further.
Wonderful. The next part of this question, Why did you choose to get a license for implant instead of outsourcing analysis to like a consultant or a university?
Because I like to do things myself. I don't know.
I
um,
understand
you
that.
know, I think the great thing about it is, I mean, you don't have to be, a quote unquote economist in order to, um, run these scenarios. And, the teams at Implant, especially whenever I first got started, were so helpful in kind of checking my math, checking my work, and, ensuring that what I was doing was accurate. If anything, I probably am way too conservative in how I run analysis. And it's and that's, I always try to reflect that in the writing the report. If a company comes to us and says it's going to be between 700 and 850 construction jobs, I'm going to use 700 every time.
Hmm.
And it's not that I don't necessarily trust somebody else to do it, but from a capacity standpoint, it's no real more capacity on out of our shop or on my end to do this work myself as to outsource it.
All right. The final part of this question, I promise that came from the audience and I did not set up, was how was the learning curve to use Implan?
I mean, I kind of answered that in the last one. It really is pretty intuitive, and it has evolved. I mean, since we first signed on, not dramatically, but it has evolved and for the better. It's if you're not a current user, I've had nothing but positive experiences in working with the team there to ensure that what we're doing is accurate. I haven't, when we signed on, it was pre-COVID, and I'm not sure. I should probably have looked before this started to see if you guys are doing any of your workshops in person down in North Carolina or not. But I was actually even eyeing some of those up, and coming down and getting enhanced an enhanced education on how I could be using this tool even more. But there's certainly no shortage of programs that you guys put together and or of the staff that you guys have to, anybody can really do this.
Well, thank you. We do try to make it as user-friendly as possible, and our product team works really hard on that.
And I
Another,
mean, here's the thing, I've had issues, but I've always gotten an answer. I think the biggest issue, for those who might not be using this tool, is probably the biggest thing that I run into, but I've now figured it out, is how do you Implan will only work if that industry exists within the area that you're plugging it into. So but you can, as long as it exists in the Commonwealth, or if I can email you guys to get what the kind of the figures are, to plug in to kind of create that industry within the region that I'm working in, it'll work. So that's kind of the biggest roadblock, because we're dealing with companies that are doing super cutting edge things that might not exist in that region or in our Commonwealth otherwise. But there's a workaround for that, and it's easy to do, and once you do it once, it's not hard to figure out.
that is true. And we do have our support site available 24/7 too. So when you can't get a hold of one of us during, average working hours here on the East Coast, we always have that available, which has videos and articles to walk you through all sorts of things like that when you do run into a brand new industry coming to your region that just hasn't been there yet,
Right.
which is always a good thing.
That is a good thing.
All right. How about this question from our audience? Do you have any tips for effectively explaining the mechanics of implant analyses and metrics to politicians or other lay audiences?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I've scraped, whenever we put together a report, I usually include a paragraph or two about what Implan is, just to kind of lay that baseline foundation. And you guys might even have that language kind of available. I know that I've just copied and pasted from like some of the first reports that we put out. And I know that I got it somewhere, and I'm pretty sure it was from information on your website, just to lay the foundation that this is a respected tool that is used across various government agencies all throughout the country. I've never had an issue where somebody challenges the credibility of the software itself. And that's because, while we're dealing with, pro-business, pro-growth economics, there are a number of organizations that, probably opposite of us politically or policy-wise that also use IMPLAN. So, I mean, if they were to discredit it, they'd be discrediting themselves.
That's true enough. That is true enough. What advice would you give other organizations or prospective organizations looking to use IMPLAN to support their lobbying efforts?
You need to bring your story to life, and I mean, I know that I've stressed this point, but so many times I see really great information published by allies of ours, but it's so dense that I have a hard time sorting through, reading it, getting the points that they're trying to get across, and I like this stuff. So a lot of times, especially when you're dealing with members of the press, when you're dealing with members of the legislature, the attention span is very, very short, which is, and this is not a knock on IMPLAN at all, but when you run a scenario and the dashboard comes up, that there are a lot of numbers, there's a lot of information, and you need to be able to tell a story. So you have to be a storyteller to translate what all those numbers mean, and to tear that, add them up, summarize, and then create things visually, and through audio and through different outlets, allies of yours even, to take that information and to strip it down to its simplest form, and to create something that somebody can look at, digest, understand, and regurgitate. And so I think that the biggest challenge that probably a lot of people have is, how do I do that? And we use very, very simple tools here. Again, we've got IMPLAN, we've got a Canva account, and then we can publish things. So like on the Act 66 stuff, if you go to pamanufacturers.org/NEPA nat gas, that's where we house the study, we house an executive summary, but we also did a media kit or a press kit. If you click that link, it takes you to a whole page of infographics that are super digestible. And I found an article after article after article when we would do press events, that's where the press would go to look at those very simplistic infographics, and those were the things that were coming through in those articles. So being able to synthesize that information to be able to put it to use is probably the biggest challenge, but it's certainly it's very, very doable.
Well, and with your permission, when we put all of this together on our website, we can link out to your kit as well that's online that has all of the reports that you just mentioned.
Sure.
And that way all of our folks here joining us and those who want to watch this in the future can see how this was actually put into use and the publications that you put out there.
Just I am not a professional graphic designer, but I'd like to play one on TV.
So no judgments on graphic design allowed from anyone in the gallery. All right. Well, I think that got to most of the questions. I haven't seen anything else pop through on my side. Is there anything else that I missed that you wanted to say before we head off today?
No, I don't think so. The main thing is I mean, we really value, our partnership with you guys, and what you guys are doing and able to provide. The information is always timely, and it's a lot of information to cycle through and digest on your end, and the fact that you guys normalize so many different data sources and create these tools that we can work with and interface with is just incredibly valuable. And again, it's not even just running a scenario of plugging numbers of jobs or amount into the economy or decreasing from the economy, but just to even be able to open up the data for the Commonwealth as a whole, for regions, for individual counties, and to be able to, go through and look at, from the productive sector standpoint, what are the drivers from an economic standpoint of those economies, is just incredibly valuable. And there very well may be other tools out there to do that, but in my experience, what you guys have put together is by far the easiest to use and most comprehensive that I've found.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. We do strive for that very thing, to make IMPLAN not only a very robust system, but also very easy to use as well. So with that, if we have any questions after this webinar, please feel free to reach out at any time to support@implan.com. That comes directly to our customer success team, and they will get back to you as soon as they can with any of your questions. If you want to schedule a demo, you can join or schedule one of those by going to implan.com/demo or emailing sales@implan.com. And as always, support questions, support@implan.com, the support forum, support.implan.com. You don't really need the rest of that. Just support.implan.com will get you there. That'll take you to here, which has, again, a robust wealth of information about how to do everything within the IMPLAN application. So again, thank you to our special guest, Carl. I really appreciate you being with us today and taking time out to share your story and, your bigger than Amazon HQ2 story. I will still argue that Hershey's might be the most important thing coming out of your state, but that might be a different debate topic. So thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.